Welcome to Gospel Tangents Podcast. I'm Rick Bennett. We'll continue our discussion of Black History Month with Elijah Abel and his biographer, Russell Stevenson. In this next episode, we'll talk about what happened to Elijah Abels following his Canadian mission. He returned to Nauvoo for a short time and then left for Cincinnati. What were some of the important events there? It turns out there were some race riots in Cincinnati, and Elijah Abel had to encounter some of the difficulties in preaching to white people in Cincinnati as well. Russell Stevenson will give us more details on that in just a moment. Before you do that, I just want to continue to emphasize we've got our Black History Month books on sale, as well as our latest book from John Hamer and Lachlan Mackay. So please get those. They're all on sale right now. So get your copy now. Also, if you'd like to get copies of this transcript as soon as possible, please subscribe for $10 a month. I'll send you a PDF copy as soon as it's released. So please do that as soon as you can. We'd love to have more people learn about us. Also, please share our episodes on Facebook, YouTube, with all your friends and family as much as you can. We'd really like to get some more subscribers. If we can get to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, that will really help us out a lot. So now back to our conversation with Russell Stevenson.
So by 1841, he is firmly located in Nauvoo. He plays a role in freeing Joseph Smith from a mob that had come from Missouri to take him and extradite him back for the charge of attempting the assassination of Lilburn W. Boggs.
Oh, okay. Do we know what year that was approximately?
That was 1841.
Okay.
Yeah. So Elijah played a role in that. He also performed baptisms for the dead, upon Joseph Smith's direction.
I believe that one of those was for his mother, is that right?
Yes.
We didn't have a lot of the rules that we have now in place.
Right. It's kind of freewheeling, right? Men are getting baptized. For women, it's, maybe not even your family member, right? It's just anyone who is dead. So it's around this same time that Elijah starts to consider moving. Now, there are any number of reasons that this could be, and this is where, again, we enter into the realm of speculation. We do know that, again, according to Zebedee Coltrane and according to Thomas Shreve, that some people believed that Elijah should not have access to the priesthood, right? Even if Zebedee Coltrane's and Thomas Shreve's accounts are incorrect, even if they are lying, right? It does tell you that at that time, they didn't feel comfortable with having a black priesthood holder in their midst. So it's around 1842 that Elijah moves from Nauvoo to Cincinnati. No,
is this as a mission, or is just he moved there on his own?
We don't have any evidence of it being an official mission, but by this point he had been ordained to be a member of a 70s quorum. Now that authorized him to serve a mission to begin with. This was done in December of 1836. So by now he wasn't just an elder, but he was also a member of the 70.
So he was likely a 70 as early as 1836.
Yes. And we know that according to records kept by Hayes and Aldrich. There was a roll of those who committed themselves to keeping the word of wisdom. And if you supported the word of wisdom, then you marked yourself off. And this was among the 70s. And Elijah marked himself as being committed to living the word of wisdom.
Now let's stop here for just a second. When I was a kid, my dad actually served as a 70 in the stake.
Yes.
Now today we have 70s that are general authorities. So my question is this like a stake 70, or is this like a general authority 70?
The model of the church was a little bit different back then. You didn't have the same kind of 70s quorums that you do today. Being a 70 basically meant that you were now authorized to preach the gospel. So it was a much more local thing. It wasn't like you were now seen as a general authority. You did have more authority more rights and responsibilities than you did as an elder.
Now, was this just pretty typical of missionaries to be called the 70 automatically? And now we're just elders.
Yes.
There's no 70s office anymore.
Right. It was a relatively common thing, and the way they interpreted the 70s office was different than we do now.
Okay, so it would probably be more akin to a stake 70 as opposed to a general authority 70.
Yeah,
okay.
that would be a closer analog.
Okay. Well, great. So anyway, continue on.
So yes, Elijah is he moves to Cincinnati, and he retains his position as a 70. We know that with some clarity. And he also holds gravitas within the Cincinnati branch. It was a pretty troubled branch. I mean, people were constantly backbiting. They were undermining each other's authority. They didn't have a lot of confidence in the local leadership. A lot of people who, the word that we'd use, and perhaps unfairly, is that they were ambitious, right? You don't believe in the leadership. You feel like you could do a better job than they could. And then Elijah moves to the area. Around the same time, there's an individual by the name of Reese E. Price who's baptized into the Cincinnati branch. Now, Reese E. Price is a pretty prominent individual even today. There is a neighborhood in Cincinnati named after him called Price Hill. He was one of the most prominent abolitionists of his day. He was a colleague of William Lloyd Garrison, and he was on the executive board of the Ohio Anti-Slavery Society. Oh, wow. He was also very strange. He was notably eccentric. I mean, he was the kind of guy who would sit in his very nice home, because he was also very rich. I mean, he was kind of the iconic eccentric millionaire. He would sit in his study and he would write these long epistles to Queen Victoria, going on and on about, the spirit of 76 and things, right? And he would also, sometimes he was known to just ramble, right? He would walk into a newspaper office and, he would give them this letter, and he would pontificate on the millennium and all these things that made people feel very uncomfortable. So everyone acknowledged that he was a rather strange person, but he was also a wealthy person and a well-respected person within the abolitionist circles. So people were willing to maybe give him a little bit more deference than they would have had he not had the kind of wealth that he did. So he joins the church. So he is a member of the Cincinnati branch at the same time and in the same place that Elijah is. Now, did that lead to some sort of collaboration and helping with the Underground Railroad? That's a very interesting speculation. It also goes beyond the evidence again. Trust me, I would love to know that Elijah played an active role in assisting with the Underground Railroad. We just don't know that. We do know that the neighborhood where he lived as of 1850 was a heavily German neighborhood, and that tells us that he was, even if he was identified as being a person of African descent, he was able to navigate the area with some ease. And that's, in Cincinnati, that's no small thing, because in about 1842, yes, it was 1842, or it might have even been fall of 1841, there had been a massive race riot breakout within Cincinnati between local white workers and the African American community. I mean, it was quite violent. Many prominent abolitionists found themselves under fire. Their homes, their businesses, their offices were all targeted for mob attack. And it's reasonable to suppose that Reese E. Price would have found himself under attack as well. So the fact that Elijah could navigate these white spaces, it tells you that he had the skill to be in both worlds. And yet, in spite of this ability, in spite of this, this comfortability with white spaces, we know that in 1843, I speculate, due to some of the heightened tensions that had developed due to this race riot, that that three apostles, Heber C. Kimball, Lorenzo Snow, and Orson Pratt, they banned Elijah from preaching to people not of African ancestry.
Okay. Yeah. So that what approximately what year was that?
This is 1840. Not approximately. It was 1843.
Oh, 1843. So yes. he had some restrictions placed on him.
Yes. I can't emphasize enough though that it was not a priesthood restriction. They had if they wanted to take away the priesthood from Elijah at that time, they could have. Right. That was the perfect opportunity to do so. They did not. In the minutes that tell us about this episode, he is explicitly identified as a 70. And there is no comment made about him losing priesthood. And 2 years later, there was a newspaper article, again referring to Elijah's workings in that branch, where he's also referred to as a 70.
Oh, okay. Was that a Strangite newspaper, if my memory is correct?
No, the newspaper article I'm referencing comes from the Times and Seasons.
The Times and Seasons, okay. And it spoke positively of Elijah Abel then?
It spoke given the context, given the people who were producing these minutes, yes, there were a number of people who identified themselves as critics of the Quorum of the Twelve. They were likely supporters of Sidney Rigdon during the succession crisis, but I only suggest that because the documentation that we have suggests that there was a strong Rigdonite faction within that branch, and it's only a few months later in which these Rigdonite, it's only a few months later when these critics begin to rise up within this branch. So I draw the conclusion that they likely affiliated with this Sidney Rigdonite faction. Now, according to the newspaper article, Elijah called for their excommunication.
Wow. Now, there was some interesting things going on in that branch. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Russell Stevenson. In our next conversation, we'll talk a little bit about Brigham Young. He is often credited as being the author of the Temple and Priesthood ban, banning blacks from the temple and LDS priesthood. However, it seems the story is a little bit more complicated than that. Brigham Young actually mentions to a black person, Warner McCary, that there was a fine black elder in Massachusetts. Listen to Russell Stevenson tell about this story.
When Brigham Young is addressing William McCary, he mentions explicitly the example of Walker Lewis in Massachusetts, and he says he's one of the best elders that we have. Now, this is in the context that William McCary is talking about how unwelcome he's feeling within the Latter-day Saint community. All these different people are using the N-word to describe him. He says, there goes that old N-word and his white wife, referring to Lucy Stanton, who was the daughter of a former state president. Now, the fact that Brigham Young would invoke the example of Walker Lewis as a way of assuring and maybe trying to make William McCary feel better about being within the Latter-day Saint community, that tells you that Brigham Young saw William McCary and Walker Lewis as being more or less equivalent in some regard or another, and certainly within the realm of holding the priesthood.
Thank you so much for listening. Make sure that you like our page on facebook.com/gospeltangents. You can subscribe at youtube.com/gospeltangents. We're also on Twitter @gospeltangents, as well as make sure that you subscribe on iTunes so you don't miss any of our episodes. Thanks again for listening. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here you'll see some more of our videos. Thanks again.